there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is Content Farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world. Ајде, мајката!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
When you're wounded and left on Afghanistan's plains, and the women come out to cut up what remains, just roll to your rifle and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier. The young British soldier, Rudyard Kipling. And the end of the fight is a tombstone white with the name of the late deceased, and the epitaph drear, a fool lies here who tried to hustle the East. The Nulaka, also by Rudyard Kipling. Yes, after a rather long hiatus involving traveling and whatnot, we begin this, our 120th podcast, with quotes of poems from English poet and author Rudyard Kipling, for the simple reason that they are relevant to what we want to talk about today: Afghanistan, Macedonia's role in that country, and NATO, and the future of the alliance. So we will discuss all of this and much more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin in Skopje, Macedonia, after evacuation from Kabul. I was able to get the one of the early flights.
Actually, I shouldn't laugh. This is a real. If I laugh like that, I sound like Kamala Harris, who could become president sometime in the next 6 months, given the state that Joe Biden is in right now. It is a royal mess. What has happened in Afghanistan these past few weeks. Cvetin, as you know, I was in Macedonia, and recently, and I got up. I took that 4:30 a.m. Austrian flight last Sunday on the 15th. Today's the 22nd of August. Yeah, 22nd of August. We're recording this, but last Sunday, the 15th, took the Austrian flight. I think a few hours before I had checked, the news, because I'm a news junkie, and wanted to see what was going on in Afghanistan. And by the time I got to London, because I flew through Heathrow, Kabul had already fallen, and and the chaos that has ensued and has ensued this week as the American military tries to get American citizens out, as NATO allies who are there try to get their citizens out, and as well as, of course, Afghans who worked with NATO, the US, and other countries, including Macedonia, over the past 20 years. And it's just been an incredible mess. Not the fact that we left, but how we left or are leaving, I should say. And as I mentioned, I used those two poems from Rudyard Kipling, British author, poet, actually born in India, believe it or not in Afghanistan, but he wrote a lot and about the region and whatnot. Of course, his famous book, The Man Who Would Be King, made into a film, is really about Afghanistan. I don't think they called it Afghanistan in the film and in the book, which touches on. Sorry?
It was still Kafiristan, where they found Alexander the Great's
That's right.
abandoned city, Iskanderun or something like that.
That's right, yes. And his descendants, and it plays on Kipling's Masonic affiliation as well. So
fight for him, make him king, then we'll subvert that king. We'll seize his royal throne and loot the country 4 ways from Sunday. How's that for a plan?
Anyway, Kipling knew something about the region, wrote about it. Of course, we've all heard about all of the graveyard of empires, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No question that Americans wanted to get out of Afghanistan. The question is how. Of course, we're still in Germany, Japan, South Korea, Bond Steel in Kosovo.
Much more pleasant countries than Afghanistan to be in.
True, yes, yeah. The culture is a little bit different, although we did defeat both Germany and Japan soundly, and but that was a long time ago. So, and going back to what I just mentioned about Kipling in India and whatnot, the British were in India for 200 years. 100 is the British East India Company, and then another 100 is the British Raj until the independence of India in, I don't know, 1947. Bottom line being that the British were willing to stay for 200 years. We weren't even willing to stay in Afghanistan for 20 years, and the Taliban have taken over. My only question is, will the Taliban run up their flag over our embassy on September 11 or before September 11? But all of this, and of course, the men and women of the military, whether it's the American military or the Macedonian military or our other NATO allies, the men and women of the military are heroes. They are doing what they have been told to do in trying to help people get out of this collapsing country. There's no blame for them whatsoever. But it is the civilian leadership, starting with President Joe Biden and those around him, NATO leadership and others that share the blame for all of this. And of course the Taliban. The Taliban actually are the ones that get the most blame because they're a group of murderous thugs. But I think, as I mentioned in the monologue, this does a great deal of damage to NATO. First of all, because it does a great deal of damage to the credibility of the United States, which is frankly NATO. But we've seen the headlines come out over the past week. I think the British Parliament actually condemned Joe Biden. This is our closest ally.
Yeah, it was ugly,
Yeah,
They're pretty outspoken.
Yeah, some of the headlines, Financial Times, NATO allies urge rethink on alliance after Biden's unilateral Afghanistan exit. That's the Financial Times. And in that article from August 17, there's a quote, it, meaning the withdrawal, it weakens NATO because the principle of in together, out together seems to have been abandoned both by Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Here's somebody that Macedonians are quite familiar with, George Robertson, or I should say Lord George Robertson, the former NATO Secretary General during the 2001 conflict. He said, quote, this, meaning there was a meeting of NATO foreign ministers the other day, this will not be an easy meeting for NATO foreign ministers. The alliance has been weakened. America and the West have been weakened, and it is a shameful ending of a mission which achieved so much for the society of Afghanistan. This is the former NATO Secretary General of NATO. So, but as Zoran Zaev keeps saying, to bring it back to Macedonia, Macedonia is protected by NATO.
Yeah. They will not pick our phone, in DC if there is some trouble in Macedonia. Like Biden didn't pick up Boris Johnson's phone for what was it, like a day and a half,
36
2
hours.
days, something like that.
Incredible. Incredible. Now,
I tweeted like, if there is some trouble in Macedonia, the U.S. will not pick up the phone unless, the other option is that the U.S. will be causing the trouble in Macedonia. So even though we are a NATO member, we are obviously in the clear that it means very little. If this is the premier NATO mission, which was meant to redefine what it means to be NATO, and if NATO is involved for 2 decades into building, on one hand, a political system of accountable, responsible, pro-Western leaders who will integrate women and reform the country and provide economic development and education and infrastructure, and on the other hand, NATO is involved in building up an army to protect this political system, and it all collapses in the time you needed to say Islamabad. It doesn't really say well about NATO, and this is our first military defeat as a full NATO member. So we're taking it personally. This is our first defeat in Afghanistan because, originally we were the empire which the Macedonians which conquered Afghanistan and did not lose it. It was not driven out by guerrilla. Actually, the story is that Alexander's descendants, the successors, built like a properly functional kingdom. Bactria is considered to be a fairly okay kingdom in Central Asia, like set up by Alexander, descending Alexander. So we definitely didn't leave like the British left in that famous expedition where only one soldier survived.
Yes.
From 15,000 people, men, women, children, soldiers, and then we obviously didn't leave like the Americans are now, the Russians afterwards and the Americans now. So yeah, maybe we should have been consulted more about the course of the mission. But yeah, it's a big failure. It's a big one.
It is. And so NATO allies are furious with the U.S. The U.S. has been caught flat-footed with its pants down, whatever you want to say. Obviously, the most important thing right now is to get people out of Afghanistan. First, our citizens, and then translators and others that have worked with NATO for the past 20 years. There'll be plenty of time to blame and finger point, of course, after this. And of course, the Taliban actually are, from a public relations standpoint, I've been following this. It's interesting. They're still trying to figure out what kind of a government they're going to form. Yeah. They're not saying careful. Anything. Sorry?
They're careful. They're more,
they're
down to.
They're using social media. Of course, Donald Trump's off Twitter, but the Taliban is on Twitter.
Yeah.
I figure. And we'll see. I saw some of our listeners might remember Abdullah, the man so nice they named him twice. One of the leaders in Afghanistan, who was supposed to be the last president after, but Ashraf Ghani, who has fled and is in, I believe, UAE with his money and his family. But Abdullah is still there, and I started following him on Twitter because he was meeting with the Taliban, trying to figure out what kind of a government they're going to form. And I can't help but thinking, Cvetin, looking at Abdullah tweeting out, I wonder if in a month he's going to be alive,
Yeah.
We already know the reports of the Taliban around Afghanistan, already the murders, the beatings, forcing women back into their homes, etc., they can't go out, etc., the sex slavery that's going to come about, etc., not to mention the drug trade, etc. But, the Taliban saying that they're not going to have any retribution or go after people that worked with NATO members. I don't believe a word they say. I mean, Joe Biden the other day in his one of his two press conferences that he's given on Afghanistan said that it was in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, a former Clinton official, by the way, interesting, now works for ABC News. Biden said that he thought the Taliban were having an existential crisis. I don't think that the Taliban think they're having their own existential crisis. And then the chief of military of the British Defense Forces, I think Nick Carter, I may be wrong on that name, but he had an interview, I think, with the BBC the other day in which he said, we need to be very careful about using the word enemy when it comes to the Taliban. And he says they want to be inclusive. And I'm thinking, this is part of the reason why this is such a massive catastrophe, is because the leaders of the United States, in this case, Britain, NATO, etc., are totally, they're so woke that they have no idea what's going on. I mean, I'm reading a NPR article here, National Public Radio, which I don't like supporting with my tax dollars. I don't think the media should be paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. But anyway, talking about how the Afghan army members, a lot of them couldn't read or write. And yet, USAID was there in Afghanistan teaching gender studies.
Yeah.
Maybe the priorities were wrong. Maybe they should have been, USAID should have been teaching men and women how to read and write instead of talking about gender studies. It's just, I think that's a large part of it.
Yeah, definitely. The collapse came months after the Gay Pride month when
yes.
I don't think they lifted the LGBT flag over the U.S. embassy in Kabul, but the embassy definitely tweeted about this, and it's certain that a good portion of the diplomats and the accompanying NGO satellites around the embassy were trying to skip a whole maybe a millennia of development in Afghanistan and take them from the 7th century into some imaginary 21st century which only exists in San Francisco and parts of New York and nowhere else.
Yes.
And it was interesting if you listened to the when Biden was speaking on the evening, like when Kabul fell and they had to drag him to the White House to to say something. And he said he had a couple of fumbles while he was talking. Otherwise, he was this very annoying Biden figure, like his usual style, like in your face, accusing everybody. The Afghans didn't fight well. It's not my fault that we withdrew and demoralized them completely and left them without air force. Overnight flew out, etc. So it was very annoying. I genuinely dislike this person. Since I think his debate with Paul Ryan in 2012, and of course over his involvement in Macedonia, but he would say anything, he would do anything, he would, in our case, in Macedonia, he would say anything just, to accomplish whatever the goal is at the moment. In the case of the debate with Ryan, he would make gestures, act like a monkey just to, confuse, just to confuse his opponent. Very, very ugly person. Genuinely dislike him. And he had a fumble where he said, like, the NGOs. He said our NGO agencies, and then he realized that he made them sound like they're part of the US government, FBI, CIA, the other agencies, and he said, sorry, our NGO organizations. And he was very correct. It's clear that the far left NGOs are part of the US government now. USAID funds them as they, try to administer. The last thing on their mind is actual development of the country. The main point is identifying political allies, far leftists, advancing them into power, dividing power with them afterwards, as we saw in Macedonia for so long. And, I'm very sad about the plight of the Afghan people. For many of them, life hasn't improved a bit since the US intervention. But on the other hand, I'm honestly happy that this side, which I experienced in Macedonia, is a hostile actor trying to bringing down our government, trying to re-engineer our national identity, our history, our how we look at life. They're trying to advance positions which are, even for us, generally urban and enlightened, should we say, 21st century European population are far off, and very people have a sincere reaction when they hear the latest talking points from the US embassy, like you have to admit refugees, a post-national country, a post-religious country, boys are girls, girls are boys, etc. Even for us it's too much. I can imagine how all these talking points sounded to an Afghan villager when the embassy tried to advance them. And I'm not really feeling particularly sorry for the NGO activists in Afghanistan now, the Radio Free Europe journalists and whatever, and the translators for the armies and for the intelligence agencies, who are now, using the proximity to the occupying power to leverage excellent jobs, accepting uncritical, I suppose, all their talking points, even though they were inapplicable in Afghanistan, failed dismally at their job to, create any sort of economic development, something that would bind the people of Afghanistan to the occupation, to this new, let's say, government. And now they collapsed. The evening of this collapse, many on Twitter and social media here were like, even I think had the comment like, okay, soon in Skopje, hopefully, when we would see the helicopters evacuating the US embassy. And we have very little to feel, sympathy with our own types of. Is it too much to say that Macedonia is under occupation of the US embassy here? I don't think it's too much. They determine outcomes, policies, governments, outcomes of referendums. It's not a military occupation, but it's in every other purpose. It's an occupation, and I will not be sorry when it's gone. And I know that in Afghanistan things are going to be horrible now, but I don't know. Just emotionally, I'm not there to lament the fall of the American and NATO administration of Afghanistan.
Yeah, good rant there. Let me compliment you on that. And but 3 points. First, as it relates to Joe Biden and Macedonia, I never get tired of this quote because I remember it. I was in the room with Joe Biden and Boris Tchaikovsky on his trip to Washington D.C. in May of 2001 during the height of the attempted split of Macedonia by Ali Ahmeti and the National Liberation Army, now DUI. Joe Biden looked at Boris Tchaikovsky and said, quote, "This is not about right or wrong. This is about what is possible," unquote. Joe Biden could have cared less at that point about who was right and who was wrong in that war, and he just wanted it ended. And his message to Boris was, do whatever it takes to make it stop. That was wrong. It tells me that Joe Biden did not have then and does not have now a moral compass.
Yeah.
Despite what
or he picked the Albanian side, which was,
and all of his
or he was working for the Albanian side in Macedonia.
Yeah. Point number one. Point number two. So Chuck Hagel, former U.S. Republican senator, defense secretary under Barack Obama, decorated veteran of Vietnam War, said in a Politico article the other day, he said, "We get into these situations, we're never sure why we're there. We never get to learn the country, the customs, the people." And that is the case in Afghanistan, and that is the case in Macedonia. Macedonians are a conservative people, a conservative society, and we go there and we fly our freak flag, the pride flag, same as in Afghanistan. The Old Testament book of Proverbs, pride goes before a fall and haughtiness before destruction. Pride flags go before a fall and haughtiness before destruction.
Yeah.
But these people are there to try and force Macedonians and Afghans and other people around the world, force them into the sunny, uplit lands of wokeism, and it's wrong. And my third point, there's a in Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises. There's a character, Mike Campbell, I believe is his name, and who has gone bankrupt. And the question to him is, how did you go bankrupt? And he says, 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah.
And that's how empires end: gradually and then suddenly. And this is what this is what's going on. And again, NATO is severely damaged in all this. Welcome to NATO, Macedonia.
Oh yeah, thank you. First, right in time for the first defeat of NATO, like the formal defeat with evacuations and relying on the kindness of the occupying power, or the, let's say, the rebel power.
The murderous Taliban,
Yeah, to let you leave the country. We have a bunch of, I think we have like 100 Macedonian citizens, mainly Albanians, from working through this Ecolog company, which does a lot of logistics for US bases, and they were apparently all evacuated. So far, we don't have reports of anybody being killed or beaten or something. But it's very weird how this performative degeneracy, like sexual deviancy, is always a feature of a collapse of a delayed stage collapse of the empire. I guess that it in some small degree hastens the fall, because it's pretty clear signal to the enemies, to the fighters, to the less enlightened, less progressive, let's say, neighbors of the enlightened city of Kabul, that if they're already celebrating gay prides there with flags, and I know that the embassy was not really holding a gay pride parade in Kabul or anything like that, but still the flag itself is a signal that the men are not that manly in this city, and that the soldiers are not that, the embassy, the U.S. armed forces are now all about, we have the first fully openly gay Navy, crew on a small ship, or or a helicopter crew or something like that. It's a signal that you're not really the most manly of nations and armed forces, and it's perceived as weakness, and weakness is provocative. So I can imagine that it was a good signal for the Taliban to, okay, now they're pushovers. It's about time we finish this. It's about time we don't even have to wait out for this decent period until they leave the country. And yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we could say something similar happened in Macedonia. Obviously, Macedonians are somewhat, or noticeably more progressive or liberal, shall we say, compared to the Albanians. Mm-hmm. And we were attacked by a less progressive, more traditional, more conservative, more family values, more religious nation in 2001, our neighbors, the Albanians, and we lost with a lot of involvement from the US. So, I think it's a common feature in history that once you go this way, your neighbors who have not followed as quickly along this path or at all perceive you as a weakling, and somebody who, if you have valuable real estate, land, a developed city infrastructure, why not clear our neighbors out and take it off their hands? So it happened to us. It's happening now in Afghanistan, and I think it's a feature of history.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, the Ricochet podcast, the flagship podcast of Ricochet.com, with they were interviewing our friend Victor Davis Hanson from the Hoover Institute, and he had a quote in there, and I don't know if I've got it right exactly, but Hanson was talking about, he called it the wages of affluence and decadence. Mm-hmm. And the wages of affluence and decadence are a tired, morally bankrupt people and nation. And that is exactly what we've got going on here in the United States, at least with a significant number of people here. I think in many of the NATO countries, especially the Western Europeans, the wages of affluence and decadence is that they're tired, they're morally bankrupt, they're spiritually bankrupt, of course. And this is what happens, and again, to your point about the weakness, what is going on right now in Afghanistan, and it's going to continue. We don't know for how long this is going to take, but the long-term damage to the United States and to NATO by default is going to be significant. Yep. I mean, take Taiwan, for instance. So we have a policy of strategic ambiguity with respect to Taiwan and mainland China, the Chinese communists, in that, are we actually going to go to war in defense of Taiwan but when the Chinese communists decide that it's time for the invasion? And they will invade Taiwan within the next 5 years, in my opinion. I don't think so. We're certainly not going to do that. Now, Taiwan's not a NATO member, of course, but what does this say to, for instance, the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania? They are just as worried. Let me see. There was a quote in here I found. This is from the Financial Times as well. The Baltic states may now question how the U.S. would respond to a triggering of Article 5 in the event of a Russian attack. Article 5 is attack on one's attack on all. Of course, that's been going on for a long time. People have been wondering, questioning, will NATO come to the defense of Estonia if the citizens of Narva, which is right on the border with Russia, are somehow attacked? And I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that.
The maintaining of the North Atlantic Empire is now the woke white man's burden. It's no longer our problem. It's now a problem of the wokes in the U.S. They are now the most, I would say, engaged warmongers and liberal interventionists and fighting Russia, and we are now control NATO, and you all must join, etc. And woke white man's burden, of course, to paraphrase another poem from Kipling. And it's not going to end well. I mean, they are, by the very virtue of the fact that the left is now pursuing all this, the US empire narrative, the right is going to withdraw from it, and this means, I suppose, most of the common soldier, if not the officers and the intelligence services. We see that the intelligence services are now fully on board with the left, but they would still need people to fight this fight, and these wars are going to become very unpopular if these type of people are leading them and are declaring them, and if the goal is, we're bringing critical race theory to Afghanistan, it's a complete joke. And the war wasn't popular, I suppose, in the US, but then listen, I mean, I doubt it was item in the first 20 items on the list of things people care about. I mean, it was like a few thousand soldiers. I think the country would easily agree or wouldn't even know or care if Biden sent like 10,000 more to reinforce the Afghanistan after his election. I mean, okay, everybody says it was unpopular. The polls said everybody wanted to get out, but would anybody act or do anything in the U.S. if Biden increased the presence? It would have been a very easy electoral promise to violate. I mean, everybody cares now about the COVIDs and the economy and stuff like that. This is probably the item number 20 on the list. So it would have cost him nothing to actually remain there. But no, this is the one policy from Trump we have to see through, we have to implement. And the lesson to everybody around is that the US is not serious about its obligations. We might see a refugee flow, although at this moment, I mean, if these people get to Turkey, let's say the Taliban, are unable to pacify the country. There are civil wars breaking out across the place. People are trying to flee. If they get to Turkey, we saw Turkey. I think it was late last year. It tried to reignite the migrant flow toward Greece. Now Greece is under a conservative government, so they will not let the migrants get on a dinghy to the first island of Lesbos and then catch a ferry organized by the government to Piraeus in Athens and then take a bus or the railway to Solun in the north and then cross into Macedonia. This government will not allow this to happen again. Will Turkey try to, sail them into Bulgaria? It's possible. Will it try to take them into Russia? Russia has been toying with creating a refugee crisis through Belarus, through Norway for a while. It's possible. Maybe they will head to Egypt and Libya. This is a well-established path, although a bit more dangerous. So I don't know if we will see in Macedonia a repeat of the migrant flows. We still have a border and patrols from, Slovakia, Hungary, assisting our soldiers and police on the border with Greece. So we would presumably stop the refugees if they arrive in any number similar to what we had in 2015, 2016. We are, this is the most ridiculous part. It's not funny, I'm not laughing at them, but it's ironic given how, Vemera was warning that under SDSM, the refugees, the migrants will come and will be accommodated in Macedonia, among all other concessions that Macedonia will be making to the Americans or to the Albanians and to the Greeks and the Bulgarians, imposed by the Americans, all these concessions. So this is, there is a famous comment by Gruevski who is listing, federal country with the Albanians running part of the country, name change with accepting all Greek demands, identity change, accepting Bulgarian demands, blah, blah, blah. And then he says migrant camps in Macedonian territory. and this is now one of the last prophecies. The last one, I think, is full legalization of gay marriage, and so we now know what's next. And so Zaev, I think he was neck and neck with Albania and Kosovo in publicly declaring that we are ready to accept refugees from Afghanistan, or maybe just a few hours late from these two American satrapies in the Balkans who would accept whatever the US embassy tells them to do. Albania already hosts people from another failed American CIA experiment, the Mujahideen cult in Iran. So Albania already houses a bunch of these people who had to be evacuated. These Shia revolutionaries who are against the current regime in Iran. So they're housed in a base in Albania because they were unsafe in Iraq. Kosovo had training camps for Islamist Sunni groups in Syria. They said they're not ISIS, but they were very ISIS-like. So now these two countries said, no, we will immediately accept thousands of Afghan refugees because they were the peacemakers, the NGO activists, the journalists, the translators for the army, blah, 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 their wives, etc. And Zaev was immediately neck and neck with Albania and Kosovo. He now says he's ready to accept 1,800. So far, he's been contacted by groups like NDI, and he said 650 are declared for us. So I suppose some of them are already in Qatar and will be arriving soon. We'll have them in hotels, in such accommodation. The government is even talking about organizing education for the children or work permits for them. So practically on one hand, they're saying it will be temporary until the US administration processes their visa applications, asylum applications. But on the other hand, we are preparing to house them for a significant period of time. And it's a huge news in Macedonia. A lot of people are like, are you crazy? What are you doing?
Not just house them, but as you said, give them work permits. So that implies long-term jobs.
Yeah, the government is building an asylum center in Bardovci, which is funny because it's a very popular destination with the diplomats. But this is not going to be finished in time for the Afghans. This will be sent in hotels, and there are protests in Bardovci. There is outrage on social media. I'm not very concerned. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, of all the people who crossed through Macedonia in 2015, 2016, nobody remained. A couple of people, one was electrocuted and injured, so he had to remain. One lady, a Kurd from Iraq, I think, got married to a Macedonian guy, so stayed for a while, then divorced and came back. I don't know where they stand. So, but we individually know the stories of the people who remained out of maybe 1.5 million, 2 million people. So nobody is going to remain. If the US government denies these people 650, 1,800 Afghans, how many Zaev agrees to accept, denies them asylum, we'll just tell them, listen guys, Germany is that way, run. At any given moment. But Zaev is very funny. He's there's bunches of statements that no, we're not accepting refugees, never. Weimar is lying to the people. That's never going to happen. We're not going to have migrant camps. He would say this a bunch of times. And now he's saying, these are the peacemakers, these are the intellectuals of Afghanistan. we're having they're all Facebook and Google engineers from Afghanistan. And in fact, they're the same slimy sleazeballs we have in Macedonia, who revolve around the US embassy, eager to get crumbs from the latest NGO project FAD, and they would sell their mothers down the river just to have an extension of their projects for 3 months or 6 months. They have given up their identity, their nation, their religion, their ancestors for just because they anticipated. Sometimes they were not even asked to do this. They anticipated that the embassy will ask them to do this, and I imagine that the type of people that revolve around the U.S. embassy in Kabul are very similar, and I don't know. I mean, it's. I wish the least possible amount of disturbance there, and that whoever wants to get out gets out. But I don't know. It's at the moment I'm just savoring the collapse of this experiment.
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. And I do think a lot of them will make their way up to Germany and Sweden and other places. But speaking of Germany, of course, we have elections there. We have elections. They have elections. September 26th, I believe, to succeed Mutti Merkel, who is finally stepping down after 16,000 years in office. 16 years in office. And
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, no. And it'll be interesting to see what effect, if any, this debacle has on the German elections. I think that's the first major European country, NATO member, to have elections after this. The French elections are...
Yeah, the French vote too.
Yeah, they're in 2022, I think, early spring. So, but let's hit a couple of other items here. Speaking of elections, we got local elections coming up in Macedonia.
Was a full Afghanistan episode.
What's that?
This was a fully Afghanistan episode so far.
So far. So let's a couple other. These aren't light items, as the editors podcast calls them, but these are other items. Local elections, October 17 in Macedonia. Best guess?
I'm still not sure they'll take place. We have horrible COVID numbers. We are almost at the level of the worst period in March, April, and Zaev would be happy to postpone them. The last poll from NDI did not look good for him, and it's bad especially because NDI is a very friendly organization to his government, and it was like 15% Vimero, 10% SDSM. Okay, Zaev has a coalition with DUI, so this kind of like makes up for the numbers, but then Vimero is now discussing a coalition with the opposition Albanian parties. Vimero tried to form a coalition with Levica. They made them a public offer. Levica is publicly refusing, which again makes them look like they're really not that interested in bringing Zaev down, but more like sniping at Vimero and taking chunks of their electorate if they can. So we are preparing for elections. Both parties declared most, or maybe like 2/3 of their candidates, but there's still a lot of infighting. In SDSM, they feel strong, so they have resurgent groups like in their party who demand that they want to challenge like the incumbent mayor of, let's say, Prilep or Aerodrome, so they're infighting between themselves. Vimero are weaker still because they hold almost no positions, so they have delayed in announcing the candidate for the capital of Skopje, also other important positions like, I don't know, like Aerodrome. So they are more, I suppose they're more careful because if they announce the candidate soon, then it's pretty certain that SDSM are going to play dirty and maybe file charges against somebody close to the candidate, try to discourage him from running. So it's pretty close to the elections, and we still are lacking some of the important candidates in the race, some of the important names. Obviously, Vimero as well. It's going to be, they're going to inherit a coalition with the Albanian parties, and they're going to beat SDSM in a one-on-one fight, and this is going to be a good basis for demanding early elections. But again, I'm not getting too far ahead of myself because this is not a democracy, it's not a normal country, it's semi-occupation, and it all depends whether the US Embassy is going to allow a fair race, and then if they're going to allow Zaev to, I don't know, to slip. The speed with which Zaev agreed to accept the refugees is indicative that he wants to buy some brown nose points with the embassy and the Biden administration.
Yes. And then next door, of course, Bulgaria, which just had their second elections in July, inconclusive. So they're going to go to third round elections, kind of following in the Israeli mold of having 4 elections and then finally taking a year to have 4 different elections and then finally coming up with something. But So they're going to have elections again for parliament sometime this fall. And in the meantime, of course, Macedonia goes nowhere in terms of EU membership.
Yeah.
And Albania, of course, is tied to that, so they go nowhere in terms of EU membership.
Yeah.
Um,
Although Zaev said he would be happy if Albania advances if we are stuck. So now he is obviously the subordinate partner in the relationship with Edi Rama of Albania, the Prime Minister of Albania, and now he's on the record that he does not oppose Albania going ahead if Bulgaria continues to block only us, and all the other EU countries are okay with Albania going ahead. This would be the ultimate humiliation for Zaev until, maybe Kosovo opens accession talks and we're still blocked.
Well, then maybe ultimately Albania becomes a member of the EU and Albanians in Macedonia flee and move to Albania.
Inshallah. I mean, if they're happy, whatever makes them happy.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Oh, so we got that. Marijuana. So I put this on the list.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't quite understand this. So correct me if I'm wrong. The African country of Lesotho shipped a large shipment of 8.5 tons of marijuana to Macedonia. Is that correct?
Yes, they did.
And yet,
we're importing drugs from.
You're growing
Congo,
marijuana
from Lesotho,
and you're importing marijuana. I'm confused.
Yeah, we are growing marijuana and allegedly turning into oil, but in reality, just fudging the numbers, declaring that all of the marijuana grown in Macedonia was converted into oil and exported somewhere, but in reality, we are smuggling it into Italy, into Austria, whatever. I don't know, the established route for marijuana smuggling is. And now apparently this is not enough for Zaev, who runs the marijuana business. He's now importing African marijuana, which again is allegedly liquefied here, oil extracted through it. But everybody knows that it's just smuggled to the black market where it can fetch the highest price.
Incredible.
So yeah, I mean, obviously they're not growing enough as much as they can smuggle into the European countries, and we are now importing more and more. We were even joking that, now when the Afghans come here, we can reignite one of our oldest exports, a product which is still on the coat of arms of Macedonia, which is depressingly Soviet style and declares the most important agricultural exports. So like it's always the wheat, and then you have, in our case, tobacco, and the third item is the poppy fields, poppy seeds, or the poppy chushki, we call them, the pods. And Macedonia was a major producer of morphine and poppies. And the early years of Yugoslavia was brazenly smuggling it to the European market for, it's a drug. It's a hard drug. And then we stopped doing this. It's eradicated except for the one pharmaceutical company in Skopje for alkaloids. And now we are, once the Afghans come, they can, show us how it's done again. We can. The climate is perfect, the environment is perfect, the soil is perfect. All we need is to get to refresh our memory on how it's produced and the lost expertise for decades since when we were not planting it. We can replenish it with the help of the Afghans, and we're golden.
So from Afghanistan's plains to from Afghanistan's hills to Macedonia's plains. Maybe that's the title.
It's going to be perfect.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're running long here. Yes, this has been almost exclusively on Afghanistan, and of course what that means for US, for NATO. Macedonia is a proud member of NATO. A couple of other items here.
Proud.
What's that? Proud?
Proud.
Proud, yes. So it's all about pride and the flags.
We
right.
couldn't be less proud.
Hey, your government decided, your government pushed and cajoled by the State Department, the European Union, and NATO, made that decision. So you own it. I
don't want to be a part of a club which would have me as a member, literally, in this case.
Well, don't forget, all clubs, all human institutions have a shelf life. And an built-in expiration date of some sort. So anyway.
Yeah. Inshallah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we've been, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've been on a hiatus, traveling and whatnot. We'll try and get back to doing these on a more regular basis. And let's do this again next week.
Absolutely.
Good talking to you, buddy.
Take care, buddy.